you guys in the corner. There we go. Okay, cool. So, good evening, everybody. I hope you guys are all doing well
All
tonight.
right. So, oh, there you go. Okay. You're good. Perfect. Thank you.
Sweet. All right. Some of you guys know me already. Some of you guys have never heard of me. My name is Alexander DeBear. I'm an Orange Audubon board member and a student living in Orlando. I'm going to tell you about warblers tonight. I told you guys a bit about warblers last week or the week before. I can't remember at this point. But unfortunately, the recording of that presentation corrupted. So I am back for round two now. A lot of the same stuff, but you guys get a bit more additional information, which is lucky for you. But yeah, before I quickly go into my introduction, I'll just tell you about this guy on the front here. This is my favorite warbler, the Kirtland's warbler. I took this photo in northern Michigan this past summer, specifically in the beginning of June. We went out on a hike with some technicians from the Smithsonian Institute, and they took us out way, way back into the forest preserve and got us these incredible looks at this really, really stunning and charismatic bird, the Kirtland's warbler, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So this is a bit about me. I've been a naturalist my entire life, but I moved to Florida when I was 15 years old in 2021. So I'm 20 years old now. I'm a founding member of the Florida Young Birders Club. And I founded it that year in 2021 when I moved to Florida because I needed friends and I wanted to afford some other young birders great opportunities and eventually take on a student as a mentor, and that's been going great so far. This is a polyphemus moth on the left there. I'm really, really big into insects as well as birds. Really just all walks of life interest me. And yeah, I mean, it's just my passion just keeps growing from there. In 2021, the person that helped me co-found the Florida Young Birders Club, or one of the people, was Kathy Riegling, who just spoke to you. So I could not have done it without her, and she basically was my mentor for the better part of 4 years or so. So she's awesome. But yeah, I've become an Orange Audubon board member since then, and I'm a birding guide as well in the public and the private sector for Archaeopteryx birding and nature tours down here and Orange Audubon as well. This photo was from a release I did a couple weeks ago of my favorite bird period, the swallow-tailed kite. Pretty late bird found in Connecticut, was transported down by a very selfless volunteer. And we got to release it in the Loxahatchee. So really, really cool bird. On top of everything else, I'm a wildland firefighting volunteer. So at places around Central Florida, I will volunteer my time to go and take care of the environment a little bit. And this is me and my brother. I think I was 7 in that photo. I think that year might have been 2012. And I said, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be a scientist. And that's awesome because I work in a lab now. So that's pretty cool. And a bit more about that and some of my more current work. I work in the laboratory of Dr. Glaucia Del Rio and Dr. Andy Cratter at the University of Florida, preparing bird specimens for them. So we get dead birds and I help stuff them. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I really enjoy doing it, and it really gets me a good understanding of what I'm looking at on a daily basis and working with. And like I said, I really love working with insects too. So this down here is the sheet lighting setup I do. You know, you put a black light on a bed sheet and a bunch of insects come to it at night. It's really fun once you get, the swing of it. I am a transfer student actively from Valencia College to the University of Florida. So in 2026, I will graduate from Valencia and move on to UF. So go Gators, right? In my free time, I also help to manage this parcel of land that Orange Audubon recently acquired, the Apopka Birding Park. I run birding surveys every last Saturday of the month. So this next survey is going to be this upcoming Saturday, the 27th. And if you would feel like joining me, which I hope you would, send me an email. and we can get you, we can get your eyes on some birds and some warblers. This photo appears from the National Audubon Conference in Montreal this past summer, and our president, Deborah Green, is in the back there. We have all of our Florida folks in this photo, which is really cool. And this is me and my buddy Ford, as in Ford Falcon, at the Avian Reconditioning Center in Apopka, who also helped me release that swallow-tailed kite. So, without further ado, oh yeah, that's not it actually. This is some of my photography. I'm a wildlife photographer. Here are some fox kits from Montreal, an eastern screech owl from a park preserve near my house, a leucistic white-rumped sandpiper. They don't usually look like that, but this is the first documented instance of this mutation in this species of white-rumped sandpiper. We found this bird over the summer, and it was really, really significant discovery. So much so that we're writing a publication about it now that we are hoping will be accepted by a willing Michigan Nature Journal. Some of you guys might know this bird, the American oyster catcher, specifically AE, at Fort DeSoto Park in Pinellas, and a photo of my favorite bird that I took at Blue Springs Park in DeLand. I can't remember what township Blue Spring is in, but I think it might either be DeLand, Sanford, North Kaiba, whatever. Yeah, Blue Spring, swallow-tailed kite, one of my absolute favorites. So without further ado, what is a warbler exactly? Well, this is a warbler. The warblers are a group of small songbirds native to the Western Hemisphere, or the New World. There are around 120 species throughout the Western Hemisphere, with about 50 of those regularly occurring in North America. So that number may fluctuate when you factor in some of the rare visitors that we get on an annual basis. The scientific group that most of the New World warblers fall under is called Setophaga. The etymology of that being, seto meaning moth, and phagos meaning to eat. So moth-eating songbirds. Most of these songbirds will eat caterpillars and moth larvae, so it does check out. Not every bird is under that genus, though. You have some like the Connecticut warbler, which I'll show you on the next slide, that's in the genus Ophrornis. And some others that are exclusively classified within their own genera. But I know that may all seem confusing at a glance, but this is what tends to be the confusion of a lot of beginning birders. This is, for lack of better word, a little charcuterie board of warblers. And warblers come in all shapes, sizes, and colors from all different walks of life, or I guess flights of life, whatever. And this is what tends to be the most confusing for beginning birders. Knowing them individually by appearance, memorizing their songs or their chips, if you're in Florida all year long, and getting to know them by name. And these are not all of the warblers. This is just a mere handful of some of the ones that you can expect in the Southeast United States, like the painted redstart, Wilson's warbler, Grace's warbler, etc. Some warblers aren't even warblers at a glance either, such as the water thrushes by name, the northern water thrush and the Louisiana water thrush. They are not thrushes at all. They are very much warblers. Same goes with the ovenbird. I don't know if he's on here. I don't think he's actually on here. If you see him, let me know. But I don't think he's on this little chart. But the ovenbird is also a warbler. Then you have like the black-throated blue warbler, the black-throated green, black-throated gray, black-throated purple warbler. I did make that last one up, but you get the idea. I know it's confusing, but by the end of the presentation, you'll know pretty much everything there is to know about every single warbler. So with that being said, warblers are extremely diverse in their ecology, their genetics, and their history. On the ecology side of things, you have one of my personal favorites, the Connecticut warbler, the Ophrornis agilis warbler. This guy is a hotshot. This guy is really, really cool, and he's sought after by birders all over the country. Despite the name, they aren't really found in Connecticut. The name comes from the fact that it was first discovered in the early 1800s, I believe around 1812, by an ornithologist, Alexander Wilson. who promptly shot the bird and ate it for its meat. Not a ton of meat on this bird, but for science, of course, right? Again, 1812, so very, very different time in history. But no, these birds aren't normally found in Connecticut. These birds will migrate through Florida during the fall time, which is pretty much right now. We're expecting to see them probably in a couple weeks or so. But these birds breed in Canada's fire-dependent peat bogs, which are a ever-fleeting resource in the northernmost parts of the boreal tundra. How do you burn a bog exactly if it's fire-dependent? If it's so wet, I mean, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out the answer to that myself. And on the right here, you have this little peanut of a bird, the Lucy's warbler. This bird weighs in at a whopping 6 grams, so no more than a US quarter. Really, really charming bird, pretty much native to the other end of the polar spectrum when it comes to habitat. These birds breed in very dry and arid dry climate in this southwestern United States. As you can see, probably behind the bird here, you have these really dry stands of juniper, some canyonlands and sagebrush in the back here. This is pretty much the habitat you're going to find the Lucy's warbler in. So nowhere close to Florida, but still an excellent bird if you can go out to see it eventually. So think like Arizona and New Mexico. It's a very sought after bird for folks that go there. On the genetic side of things, you have these two birds, or I guess this one bird, and I'll explain. You have the blue-winged warbler and the golden-winged warbler, both in the genus Vermivora. And these birds might actually be the exact same bird. Really, despite just how different they look from each other, these birds might be the exact same species. And they found that through testing both of their DNA and finding that the DNA sequencing and their DNA strands are exactly the same as each other, so nearly identical. These birds will also sing each other's song types and learn each other's individual chip notes and foraging habits, and so much so that they will actually interbreed and create very complex hybrid types, such as the Brewster's warbler and the Lawrence's warbler, which are basically back crosses and hybrids of these two birds that even more look similar to each other. But it is not very known if those offspring can produce their own offspring. Much like mules, they cannot, most of the time they are sterile. So we're still trying to figure that out, but for now they do remain as their own separate species that are up for study. And on the history side of things, you have these two warblers, which are arguably some of the most endangered birds in North America, period, even outside of the warblers. You have the golden-cheeked warbler, Setophaga chrysoparia, in the juniper stands of central Texas, where it breeds before migrating back down to Central America during the wintertime. These birds are very, very particular to that fire-dependent juniper, and in such a small localized area that they are locally endangered if anything happens to that juniper habitat. Same thing goes for the Kirtland's warbler. This bird, unlike the golden-cheeked, actually migrates through Florida during the fall and the spring, and it breeds in northern Michigan in very well manicured young stands of jack pine that are also fire dependent. But since there have been many controversies in Michigan's Department of Natural Resources, many foresters have resorted to clear cutting instead of setting fire, which has altered some of the habitat and lifestyles that these birds live normally. So they try to figure that out, and it's still an ongoing developmental thing. But the point being is that these birds are what we call ecosystem health indicator species, which means that if we as humans are doing something wrong, these birds will do very poorly. So both require natural habitat conditions that are very sharply dwindling without supplemented human intervention and wise and sustainable habitat management. And some of these warblers aren't even warblers at all. You have birds like the olive warbler and the yellow-breasted chat. The olive warbler loosely associates with the Lucy's warbler in southwest Arizona and New Mexico. It isn't actually a warbler, though, a true warbler, despite its actual name and its provenance. It is in its own family genetically entirely. And the yellow-breasted chat is one that shows its face in Central Florida from time to time, but albeit it is an uncommon species, you can see the dates in which they were respectively reclassified. And this bird was thought to be a warbler until deeper genetic analysis was done on it, and they figured out that it's actually in its own family entirely. So Icteria, it's closer to a blackbird than it is a warbler. With that being said, warblers have inspired hemispheric passion, and I think hemispheric is the right word to use here because it really has transcended our little birding bubble in the lower 48 states. All over the world, people come to go and see the warblers that the United States has to offer. Some of you might have been to this festival already, the biggest week in American birding in Ohio, northwest Ohio every year. Very big focus on seeing different kinds of migrating warblers, as you can see probably by the logos here. This is a festival that I've personally attended, not the biggest week, but this photo in the middle here of the ginormous Kirtland's warbler, there is an entire festival dedicated to the Kirtland's warbler with my friend Kai standing next to this giant brass Kirtland's warbler there. People from all over the state of Michigan come to celebrate this bird, as it is the only place where the bird is harbored during the breeding season outside of a very, very small area in Wisconsin. And of course, you have the Audubon mural project, which hosts a few different pieces of warblers. This one in particular was painted by an artist, Gail Albert Halliban, in Brooklyn, New York, on a set of red double doors here. And I think it's absolutely gorgeous. This is the Townsend warbler, which is more of a westernmost species. It's rarely found in New York, but on occasion it has been seen there. It's usually more of a western leaning species there. So you'd be more likely to find that along the California coast. And of course, you have Birds Canada and the Canada warbler, which we'll talk about a little bit. And even Amish birders will join in at the biggest weekend in American birding. And these birders have an excellent eye for spotting warblers, even more so than anybody else in this crowd with their fancy cameras and all their other gear and scopes and stuff. So if we want to keep seeing those warblers, we have to think about what is going to be in their best interest as far as conservation goes. Here are just some of the measures to ensure the survival of these warblers, such as bird banding. This is a photo I took last April of me holding a hooded warbler with a little piece of metal jewelry, that little metal band. We fit that jewelry on the bird for tracking purposes. So if that bird happens to be caught or sighted again in any other part of the world, we can know where it came from or was banded initially by reading off those band numbers. And you have bird-friendly window decals as well to break up the reflections and prevent window strike deaths. So birds smashing into windows during their migration. Pretty much the same sort of deal with the Lights Out for Birds campaign, which I think Susan touched on a little bit earlier. Those really big cityscapes with their very bright lights disorient migrating warblers and cause them to become very exhausted and smash into windows and glass and things that they would otherwise become disoriented by. So if we turn our lights off, we can reduce light pollution and let them use the stars to navigate to their wintering grounds or their breeding grounds during migration time. You have this Modus tower here, which is used for satellite communication. So much like the bird banding, some folks will fit satellite backpack little trackers, like very lightweight little satellite antennas on the back of the bird. It doesn't affect the bird at all, it doesn't hurt it, and it will molt it out in a certain amount of time, meaning that it will lose it when it regrows those feathers. But during that time, we get to see an exact track of where that bird travels to, which is really cool, recent technology, which I think is amazing. And then of course, you have the Birds and Beans company, this is one of the many companies that is based in Central and South America that grows shade-grown coffee, which means that it grows coffee. They grow coffee that's they keep the trees intact so that the birds can have their wintering habitat while not chopping down old growth. And of course, you have the wildland firefighting, which I touched on a little bit earlier, for effective habitat management. And here's a little bit about what I do as far as conserving warblers is stuffing the dead ones that we collect from window strikes and other means in order to have a better understanding of their morphology and their evolutionary changes and what we can do to further aid their success in conservation overall. So where exactly does it all begin in the context of the real life of these birds? I know I've talked a lot about, what you can do for them, but what is it like to be a warbler exactly? So it starts out as a single egg. This is not the actual size shown. And the actual size of a warbler's egg, probably about the size of a nickel by volume. And the average incubation period is about 11 to 13 days of constant warming and incubation. For example, we have this female yellow warbler, Setophaga that is sitting on a nest here in central Indiana. And this can turn from one egg to up to 3 to 6. But after 11 to 13 days of careful warming, you have one of the most beautiful spectacles of Earth creation that comes to life. Behold, the nestling. Isn't it beautiful? I love their little yellow lips. They're so cute. And after about 10 days or so, you have something that looks akin to this little fluffy thing that barely has its flight feathers yet, doesn't even have a hint of a tail. It's just a little nub, but that will grow in due time. And over the course of the next 12 days, the mother will continue to feed its chicks copious amounts of moth larvae and other protein-heavy insects. They'll grow about 10 times their starting weight, from about 1.2 grams to around 9 to 10 grams, approaching the time of migration, sometimes in as little as 10 days, which is one of the fastest growth rates of any animal on the planet. So these feathers develop extremely rapidly from these little keratin sheets that you see here, called pin feathers. And this is the same material that your fingernails are made out of, except it's a little thinner. And once those feathers grow in, these will break open and they will get preened out and totally fall off. It's just kind of a protective shell around the feather until it's able to come out on its own. So, of course, after leaving the nest, as you can see on the right here, the fledglings will continue to mooch off the parents for as long as they possibly can, even though they are quite literally grown. So this is pretty much the freeloader stage, or the teenager stage. If anyone is a parent in the audience tonight, you understand. And then there it is. After a couple months of learning how to be a warbler, you have that chill in the air, and the warbler's circadian rhythm or internal clock in their brain starts to go haywire. That means it's time to migrate down to their wintering ground, but under the cover of the stars, the night sky. And they use that as a guiding system. And the mother will have to do it alone, as will her offspring. So, like I said, if anybody in the audience is a parent, or has been a parent in the past, just think about, for perspective, asking your 2-month-old child to walk on foot from Maine to Florida in the dead of night in just the span of 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, imagine that. So not exactly the best parents, but they do make it. At least some of them do. Here you have the Canada warbler up top, followed by the black-throated blue, American redstart, and the bay-breasted warbler, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. Oh, and he has a little metal band too. That's cute. And with that, the Great Fall Flight begins. So this is the point in time in which these birds will begin to migrate south, their famous fall flight. So as the fall begins, many warblers will begin to change from their breeding plumage to their non-breeding plumage, and they will spend the entire fall and winter in these newfound colors. So they'll go from these really bright and bold, dark colors to these, lighter and less bold overall. These colors down here, very drastic change. You would not think that these are the same species even, but there are some indicators that they are, such as the chestnut flanks, as you can see, as it says, chestnut sides, those are retained, which will help us identify them. And the standard procedure for bird banders in the fall is to, for a lack of better word, blow up skirt of these warblers to check for fat deposits that very visibly line the muscle, because the skin on these birds is very, very thin. So you can see that fat straight through the feather tracts in the stomach to know exactly how much energy they have stocked up for that migration. And to prepare for migration, a bird may double its body weight to fatten up for the intense journey ahead by gorging itself on tons of berries, tons of insects, and even fish sometimes, believe it or not, in the case of the water thrushes and some other warbler species. But yeah, I just learned that pretty recently, and I was pretty taken aback by it. And during migration, they'll eat about 30 to 50% of their total body weight per day in insects, berries, and in some cases nectar, which I'll touch on a little bit later. The average 2-month-old human child weighs about 12 pounds. For perspective, imagine 6 whole pounds of food per day for a 2-month-old child. The average adult equivalent, in the case of the breeding male, assuming you're around 180 pounds or so, would be around 160,000 calories per day, assuming you burn about 13% of your total body weight in fat. So that in total calories is about the same amount as an adult Doberman would be, the dog breed. If you ate an entire Doberman from head to toe, that'd be about 160,000 calories. And that's over 80 times the daily recommended amount for an adult human. So they are consuming a ton of energy to travel the distance that they do. And they travel a hell of a distance. And a really amazing thing that we've learned about certain species is that they will fly to different places depending on the lifestyles that they lead. So, and one of the most notable and famous examples would be the blackpoll warbler, which has one of the longest wings of any of the warblers to support very long distance flight. So 7 centimeters might not seem very long, but amongst all of the warblers, it is quite long. And they have those long wings because the distance they travel is very immense. They are one of the longest distance migrants of any bird in North America, second to the bar-tailed godwit, which travels from Alaska to New Zealand. But this bird, the blackpoll warbler, will travel 1,800 miles, almost 2,000 miles nonstop over the course of 60 hours. And what is really incredible is that this isn't just exclusive to the blackpoll warbler, but other overseas migrants, is that when they are flying that 60-hour nonstop flight, they will turn off half of their brain to sleep and use the other half to fly. And they will switch those sides of their brain individually to rest up and fly at the exact same time, which is absolutely incredible. I wish we could do that sometimes. And this amazing generated map you can see via eBird shows that route that blackpoll warblers take during their fall migration, which you can largely see is over water. So if you pay very close attention, under the K in New York here, you can see that there's 2 little purple dots in the middle of the ocean, and that is Bermuda. So a lot of those blackpoll warblers actually end up all the way out there to Bermuda as they make their over water flight down to Cuba and then to Venezuela and Colombia, and even in some cases, Peru and Ecuador, to spend the entire winter. Absolutely fantastic birds with a really, really hardy style of migration. This isn't a cakewalk, though, for any species. About 20 to 30% of warblers, juvenile warblers, survive their first fall migration. Very, very little of those first fall birds actually end up surviving, unfortunately, but that number is higher in older birds and adult birds at about 50 to 60%. And those that will continue to survive their migration over the course of their entire lives will live anywhere from 9 to 10 to even 12 years in some cases. You don't really see a warbler that's older than 12 years. And there are a number of challenges to overcome on the way to their wintering grounds down south. Pictured here are some warblers affected by what is called fallout, when weather conditions collide with migration and ground very exhausted individuals. These photos are from a place called Tadoussac, which I visited this summer in Quebec. And here's an excerpt from the person that made this checklist with the photos on it, Ian Davies. He said, today was the greatest birding day of my life. Southwest winds overnight had led to high hopes for the morning, compounded by dawn rain in the area. Our first stop had been fruitless, with a handful of warblers moving, but nothing super notable. We decided to head for the Tadoussac Dunes anyway. On our arrival, it was raining. A few warblers passed here and there, and we got excited about groups of 5 to 10 birds. Shortly before 6:30, there was a break in the showers, and things were never the same. For the next 9 continuous hours, we counted a nonstop flight of warblers, at times covering the entire visible sky from horizon to horizon. That's a lot of birds. The volume of flight calls emitted was so vast that it often faded into a constant background buzz. There were times where there were so many birds so close that naked eyes were better than binoculars to count and identify. 3 species of warblers flew between my legs throughout the day, being Tennessee warbler, pictured here, magnolia warbler, and myrtle warbler. This is a Canada and Cape May. These aren't those two. But for hours at a time, a single binocular scan would give you hundreds or even low thousands of warblers below eye level. And that blurb in the bottom states 109,555 unidentified New World warblers. This is the remainder of unidentified warblers out of the 721,620 estimate that didn't fit into the species we felt totally comfortable estimating totals for. Many of the unaccounted species likely have hundreds or thousands more individuals here, and the bulk likely fits into the other primary flight species. So the birds that were mostly above flying during the diurnal portion of the day. So really, really incredible sights sometimes from these grounded, exhausted birds. This, for context, is unlike anything that you would normally see. A Canada warbler in full breeding plumage still. Sometimes it's retained through that migration, only to be molted through its migration or on its wintering grounds. On the beach, yeah, this is a really, really unusual sight, and it's typically a sign of something that is very, very wrong. So you really will never see birds this colorful out in the open because they have the chance of being snatched up by a predator or falling very ill due to other birds, competing with it directly. This is fairly unusual in the grand scope of things outside of bird migration. So really incredible. And sometimes these birds can even get swept out so far as places like the British Isles, Greenland, and inland Europe, much to the pleasure of the birders there, but not so much for the birds themselves. Sadly, the majority end up dying, but yeah, it's very unfortunate, but it's just kind of the reality of the birds that get swept away. And to think that the vast majority of these birds travel through Florida during migration. Some days it sure doesn't feel like it. And I know that some birders in the crowd tonight will probably agree with me. And the next slide, I will show you some of the birds that do not have the luxury of making it all the way down to their wintering grounds. Like I said, this is a very, very complicated feat for them to get through. I'm going to show you some photos of some dead birds. If that upsets any of you, you can feel free to look away or tune out for this portion, but it is just to illustrate the reality of the situation. It's nothing super graphic, just a bunch of dead birds here. So the birds that do not receive this luxury end up falling victim to this. So this photo is from the Chicago Museum of Natural History. All of these birds that you see here struck a single high-rise building in Chicago overnight on the night of October 5th, 2023. Nearly 1,000 birds were killed at McCormick Place in Chicago. If this is what happens with one building, just imagine every other city on the Atlantic and Mississippi flyways. A lot of casualties are taking place without the proper measures in place. And this can be improved with the aforementioned bird-friendly window decals, which are now becoming required by state law, state legislature in some places, which is amazing. When window decals were installed at McCormick Place, window collisions decreased by 95%, which is a crazy margin, all things considered. If you find an injured bird that appears to have struck a window, or a warbler, any bird really, don't try to feed it food. Don't try to feed it water, because it can do this thing where it will not, well, in its stunned state, it won't be able to digest properly. And it can do this thing called aspiration, which is when water gets inside of the lungs of the bird, which is really not a good thing. It can do more harm than good. The best thing to do if you find an injured bird is to just put it in a dark place, maybe a box with a blanket, take it to a professional or a wildlife rehabilitation center. That is the best thing to do so that these birds can get the rest of their way down. And here are some of the birds that take the overwater route here. Oops, sorry. Overwater migrants can often become disoriented by large floating vessels such as cruise ships. And this can become very drastic if combined with the Atlantic's infamous hurricane season, leading to insane fallout such as this. Some birds can be blown so far off course by storm systems and hurricanes that they can end up in the British Isles or on cruise ships thousands of miles away from where they need to be. And the cruise ships will carry them the rest of the way. And they will sometimes even hop off the ship in a place where they are not supposed to be at all. So like think about a bird on a cruise to Greece or something. And this is a prothonotary warbler on its Disney cruise. This is supposed to be a GIF, but I'm not sure exactly why it isn't playing. I can try to get it to play. Oh, that sucks. But yeah, this bird is, or I'm sorry, this GIF shows the carnage of the cruise ships. There are, in this GIF, normally it would play, there's a few hundred dead birds just lining the deck of this cruise ship. Some of them are still flying around, but all the winds that are concentrating those birds into a single spot end up like that. And it can be very tragic and detrimental to the migration. But some birds can even stay around long enough to refuel and find the rest of their way back down south, but this is rare, albeit. Some birds have the possibility of being predated. So feral or stray cats have been found to kill over 1 billion birds per year, with this metric spiking during migration, of course. A large portion of these birds are warblers. And as much as it kind of pains me to say, you also have predation by other migratory birds like the merlin and the chalk-bill's widow. This is a migratory bird that specializes in catching insects on the wing, but during migration, it has been known to snatch warblers off their perches as they're sleeping. So you can't really see it so much here, but this mouth that they have opens really, really wide, almost like a butterfly net, to create a very big space for catching insects on the wing, much like a swallow would. So some of these birds, these chuck-bill's widows, have been found to predate warblers in a desperate period. A colleague of mine in the lab that I've been working at recently dissected the gizzard of a chuck-bill's widow to find a common yellowthroat inside, a half-digested common yellowthroat. So really, really fascinating and kind of morbid that that can happen, but it is pretty cool to know that you know, in a time of desperation, they can make a resort like that. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the merlins. These birds are especially known for snatching up rare birds or rare warblers, to the dismay of some of the more serious bird watchers that go and find them during migration. Rare birds will become exhausted and as a result become, you know, sitting ducks basically for a falcon like the merlin, which is a specialized bird eater. And some unusual predators on the topic of the chuck-bill's widow. For example, you have the tiger shark. So weirdly enough, you know, some of these other birds that take the oversea route usually do so in a nonstop manner, such as was illustrated with the blackpoll warbler. Some of those birds don't make it all the way across and they lose the energy become too exhausted to keep flying, and they just drop onto the surface of the water. A study conducted in 1979 reported that 39% of tiger shark stomachs examined off the coast of Florida, so Fort Pierce specifically, contained the remains of songbirds. One example included the remains of a Bahama yellowthroat, technically making it Florida's first posthumous off-coast record. So it's kind of a weird case because these Bahama yellowthroats aren't exactly migratory warblers. They are very sedentary and skulky undergrowth warblers of the Bahama Islands. And they don't really move a whole lot. So we theorize that maybe it could have been swept offshore by a storm system of some sort and dropped down into the water, where a tiger shark snatched it up off the surface of the water and then was then subsequently harvested off the coast of Florida. We really can't know. It was so long ago, but I think it's pretty fun to think about the fact that a Bahama yellowthroat made it all the way to Florida through the means of the stomach of a tiger shark. Pretty interesting tidbit that I just found. But you know, you have these birds that make it into the better company of people, such as this Townsend's warbler that was found off the coast of California, hitching a ride on this guy's hat on a fishing charter, and this orange-crowned warbler in the middle there that was just quickly refueling before heading the rest of its way down. And then you have birds like this that are reverse migrants. So birds that are supposed to travel south for the winter, but end up traveling in the totally opposite direction due to some kind of internal error in their circadian rhythm. So this yellow-rumped warbler was found feeding on a whale carcass on the shore-fast ice a few miles north of Point Barrow yesterday, which is in very, very far north Alaska. So this is a pretty significant sighting because yellow-rumped warblers are never found that far north. But this is an amazing comic by the artist Rosemary Mosco, who is alluding to the fact that the warbler took out the whale because of how hungry it might have been during its migration. And this was a real thing that happened, but I think it's more likely that the bird was feeding on the insects that were in turn feeding on the decomposing whale carcass. But I think it would be pretty funny to imagine that the warbler took out the whale because it was just that hungry. And then with that, we get to the overwintering stage. Hope you like this little graphic I made. It's an American redstart and a Colombian and South American species, the golden-fronted redstart. Both in the same genus, but very, very different looking, but they do happen to have some overlap during the winter months. During the wintering, some of these warblers will undergo very extreme dietary changes as certain resources in their wintering ranges become far more abundant. A very notable example of this phenomenon is the Cape May warbler, seen here, with these very deep nectar flowers. The Cape May warbler has evolved a very specialized adaptation, which is a bristle-tipped tongue for scraping nectar out of deep flowered plants, much like a hummingbird would. So despite this adaptation being fairly well known, I, for the life of me, while organizing this presentation, could not find any photos of it in the public domain or online or anything. And the only thing that was available were illustrations from like 30, 40 years ago. So what I did instead was I brute forced it, and I went to the lab that I worked at, and I asked Dr. Andy Crowder, who I work under. I was like, hey, can you find me a Cape May warbler so I can look at its tongue under a microscope? And he's like, well, you're a weirdo, man, but you do you. And I took these photos of the bristle-tipped tongue, and you can actually see that there are bristles at the end of the tongue for scraping nectar out of the deepest parts of those flowers, which I think is awesome. This isn't the only species that can do this. The Tennessee and the Townsend's warblers also have this adaptation. And it is theorized that the black-throated blue warbler also has that as well. As you can see, it's drinking out of a hummingbird feeder down here. But keep in mind that these two photos up here that I took are the only publicly available photos of this phenomenon. And you better look at it real hard because I worked really hard to get these. So take a moment with that to bask in my glory a little bit. But anyway, pretty cool other example of different dietary changes would be the ovenbird, which unbeknownst to many, 6 months out of the year are ant specialists. So they will forage on South American ant species. Another cool thing that they'll do aside from foraging is they will sit in an ant's nest and pretty much bathe in the ants as they eat the ants. And what the ants do is that they will bite the feathers of the ovenbird to kill parasites and to basically build an immunity to the ant's venom to strengthen its immune system, which is really, really cool. And here are some of the birds that our North American birds that we're very familiar with will mix flocks with. So they have been known to join mixed species flocks to aid in finding food and gathering strength and numbers in a very unfamiliar landscape. Many species that have no sort of overlap any other time of the year come together and thrive on their wintering grounds, such as the Tennessee warbler and the black-throated gray, but some of the many South American endemic species that join up with our North American warblers during that time of year. And I should have prefaced, endemic means found in one place in the world and literally nowhere else. So some of these birds are just found in Colombia or Venezuela, Peru, the Andes, the Brazilian rainforest, Amazon rainforest, I mean, and nowhere else in the world, but will mix species flocks with our North American warblers. Here are just some of the few, not all of them, but just a few that I think are really cool. You got the golden-fronted warbler, which you saw a little earlier in that graphic I made, which is a subtropical Andean foothill species. You've got one of my personal favorites, the St. Lucia warbler, which is a West Indian endemic bird restricted to the island of St. Lucia, of course, in the Caribbean. I took this photo actually during a visit this past winter, last December, I took this photo, and it was loosely associating with one of our North American yellow warblers, which I thought was really, really cool. And was part of the reason that inspired me to make the presentation in the first place. You have this tropical parula, which is very similar to our northern parula, so much so that it's been known to form hybrids during the breeding season. So mixed breed, I guess not mixed breed, but mixed species offspring, it has been known to produce. And some of these offspring end up as low as South Texas and Louisiana on occasion. And of course, you have the golden crown warbler in the genus Basiluterus, which is one of my personal favorites. This photo here that you see, I did not take, but it was actually taken in South Texas a few years ago when one showed up to the pleasure of the birders that live there. So not all of the species that are shown, but just some of the species that will mix flocks with some of our North American birds and maintain that strength. So let's talk a little bit about wintering ecology, especially with the coffee plantation, the shade-grown coffee plantation, that's what I was gonna say. Some of you might already be familiar with the shade-grown coffee and just how important it is for a warbler's wintering success in South America. For birds like the cerulean warbler, for example, gorgeous bird, by the way, they rely on old growth forests to recover for the springtime. If farmers grow their coffee in the shade of these trees, instead of cutting them down, it becomes much more sustainable, even if it may result in an overall lower yield of coffee beans. But farmers have found that the longer ripening time leads to better coffee bean flavors. These farms support local biodiversity as well, whereas open sky coffee farms, which make up the vast majority of the coffee industry, support very little local and exotic biodiversity. Most importantly, though, the wintering conditions of a warbler directly affect their breeding success. If they have a very poor or traumatic wintering experience, they will have a very, very hard time surviving the upcoming spring migration. The ones that do make it back won't sing nearly as much, which means that they won't be drawn to reproduce, which affects the overall future populations dramatically. This is why I feel that wintering ecology is just as, if not more important than springtime and summertime breeding ecology with these birds. It requires much more in-depth study to understand what we can do to positively contribute to the successes of these species going forward. And it's very good coffee too. If you haven't tried it, I mean, it's definitely worth the price. Like I said, the longer ripening time contributes to deeper, richer flavors, even if it's not producing the biggest quantity of coffee beans for the farmers, but it is very, very tasty coffee. And with that, we come back to spring migration and breeding. So most warblers will take the overland route this time in order to get to their breeding grounds as quickly as possible. This is a phenomenon known as loop migration, which isn't exclusive to the blackpoll warbler. Most people in ornithology up until about 5 years ago thought that the loop migration was exclusive to the blackpoll warbler, but there are many species that end up doing this, like the aforementioned Blackburnian warbler will come down through the northern boreal habitats through Appalachia and Florida during the fall time, and then come back out through this largely overland route through central Texas and up through the Mississippi Flyway during the springtime. Same thing goes for the black-throated blue warbler. And breeding habitats can differ by species and are spread out all over North America, even as far up as Alaska and the high Arctic, like the black-throated green warbler, as you see here, which favors these late succession mature hardwood forests. Some, like the Grace's warbler, will stick down in places like New Mexico and deep West Texas in these montane pine forests, like really, really high altitude pine forests. And some even stay here in Florida, like the prairie warbler, for example, will breed in coastal mangroves. And this is exclusive to Florida. They don't breed in coastal mangroves along any other part of the Gulf Coast except for coastal Florida, specifically the Gulf Coast. They haven't been found in Louisiana or Gulf Coast of Texas as breeders, but they have been recorded in Florida almost annually for hundreds of years in these mangroves. But how do all these warblers survive exactly when they happen to land on the same habitats? That comes into something called resource partitioning. So you had this guy way back in the day, Robert MacArthur, that found that these warblers on their breeding habitat will avoid competing with one another as much as possible by doing something called resource partitioning. They will occupy different parts of the tree canopy in order to stay out of each other's way. It was once thought, until this study was done, that every single warbler species competed in basically what was a fight to the death with one another, in a constant fight for survival between every species, which is absolutely ridiculous, right? No warbler would find its way and be completely not stressed out if everything was fighting for the exact same limited resources. So over the course of a couple hundred thousands or even millions of years in some cases, these birds have found a way to allocate different resources to each other by just kind of keeping their own specific territories in different parts of the tree canopy. And that's not to say that it's only these birds that do it. These are just the birds that were included in the study done by Robert MacArthur back in the day. So it had to do with the Cape May, the Blackburnian, black-throated green, bay-breasted, and myrtle warbler. It was found that the yellow-rumped or myrtle warbler in the eastern half of the United States will tend to forage lower in this blue half, as you can see per the legend. It will hang lower in the canopy. The bay-breasted will hang in the mid to low canopy. Black-throated green will hang kind of in the middle of the canopy as well, but more on the outsides of the canopy overall. And the Blackburnian and Cape May will stick kind of towards the mid or the top parts of the canopy in order to get the best view for sallying and catching flying insects and looking out for those overhead predators for the rest of the feeding flock, which I think is really, really cool. But this system isn't entirely perfect, though. As you can see, these diagonal overlapping lines here, those are the parts of the canopy where the birds do happen to overlap and have competition with one another. So you have the yellow-rumped warbler and the bay-breasted warbler, where these blue and orange overlapping lines are. They do happen to compete for resources here, but there are parts of the canopy where they do hold their own, such as the mid canopy for the bay-breasted and the lowermost parts of the canopy for the myrtle warblers. And the parts where they do overlap just ends up being the territory for nesting space, as well as resources like food and water. And a system built this way is optimal for survival, while also reinforcing the principle of survival of the fittest. So it's not completely out of the picture. That's why, you know, competition is present to pass on the best genes to the offspring. And those birds will pass on the best and strongest genes to the ones that will ultimately survive and create stronger immune systems and better genes overall. As you can see, the mourning warbler peep the genes. And again, these are just the pilot species. Oh, and by the way, just a little tidbit that I forgot to mention earlier. The name Blackburnian is not entirely self-explanatory. That name actually comes from a naturalist, an 18th century naturalist named Anna Blackburn, who lived in Europe but had a very extensive collection of North American warblers. And she corresponded with American and European ornithologists and shared her very extensive collection with the rest of the ornithological world at the time. And as a result, had this warbler named after her. So Anna Blackburn had the Blackburnian warbler. So not many people know that's actually an eponym. So a warbler named after a person. It used to be named the orange-throated warbler, which I think is actually kind of a better fitting name, all things considered, or like fiery-throated warbler. I think that would be a better name. So with that being said, let's talk about rearing offspring with some of these unique warbler nests. Prothonotary warblers, as you can see up here, are some of the only cavity nesting warblers in their range, with the exception being the Lucy's warbler mentioned earlier. Prothonotaries nest on the edges of rivers and project their voices from the edges of the rivers. During March and April, you can actually see these in Central Florida along the Wekiva River. And it's one of my favorite things to go in kayak to try and find these birds singing on either their way up or the ones that are going to settle down and breed on the Wekiva River. Ovenbirds, on the other hand, pretty much do the exact opposite, building their little hobbit houses out of dead leaves and pine straw and other detritus to conceal their nests in the ground. These yellow warblers on the bottom, like I mentioned earlier, are really unique though, because they possess the ability to recognize eggs that were not laid by them. There's a species of bird called a brown-headed cowbird, which is not a warbler. It is a species of cowbird, which is, I believe it is in the blackbird family, Icteridae. They will lay eggs in other birds' nests so that the warblers will have to raise their young for them. So they don't build their own nests, but they have these other birds raise them as basically a parasitic relationship. If the yellow warbler happens to recognize a foreign egg in time, they will build a new nest layer on top of the foreign egg and raise their own young, giving the foreign egg no warmth whatsoever so that it doesn't hatch and kill all of its other offspring. This isn't always super foolproof though, because as you can see down here, yellow warblers are probably the most prominent and frequent victim of cowbird and yellow-billed cuckoo parasitism in the grand scheme of the warbler family. And I just love that they don't care that their children are, freakishly larger than them. I think that's pretty accepting and progressive of the warbler mom. But yeah, I mean, they have the ability to detect a foreign egg, but not foreign offspring, for example. And not so much having to do with warblers, but I just think it's a pretty cool fun fact on the side. Brown-headed cowbirds, when they do come to fledging, as you can see here, they will actually meet other brown-headed cowbirds in the night and have these like cowbird parties and learn how to be cowbirds and make cowbird noises with other parties of cowbirds. So they'll have like these secret meetups. It's really, really weird. And we learned that actually through studying the Kirtland's warbler in the northernmost parts of Michigan in the early 1900s, because they used to be really, really bad nest parasites of the Kirtland's warbler, so much so that the bird actually became critically endangered for a short period of time. And of course, you cannot have the warblers without the warbling. Warblers will perch from an acoustic vantage point in order to project their voices as far as possible. And this is to reaffirm new or existing territory and attract potential mates. If a warbler likes a nesting site enough, they will have the chance to maintain site fidelity, which means that they will continue to return to that same spot year after year after year, provided that the spot is still there and not mowed over by a bulldozer to go to build a Publix in its place. um, so songs can be visualized into spectrograms, with the width being the amount of time the length being the amount of time and the width being the frequency which the call is sung at. So this is the duration of the song, which is the length, and the frequency in kilohertz, which is how tall it is. So I hope you guys can hear this. Give me like a thumbs up or something if you can hear this. But this is the song of the Wilson's warbler, which is in the genus Cardellina, related to the Canada warbler, which you saw earlier. Has this really sweet song. Did you guys hear that? Give me like a thumbs up or something, or like a message in
Yeah,
the chat.
we didn't hear it. Sorry.
You didn't? Oh no.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, you can see the spectrogram regardless. That's just to visualize how you can hear it. I'll give you guys a chance to hear it a little later. But this is the Kirtland's warbler. They have a much lower pitched song than many of the other warblers, and I took this photo at that same occasion. I love the Kirtland's warbler, as you can tell, but they have a really lower pitched song than many of the other warblers, which is it's really fascinating. I love it. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Blackpoll warbler, which sings this really weird high frequency call that is almost invisible to some folks that don't have that range in their hearing. But it almost sounds like an insect, and it's really, really prominent and strange amongst warbler songs. And let's talk about some critically endangered and extinct warblers, ones that we, I don't want to say failed, but ones that did not end up making the cut to the modern day. So on the left, you have the Bachman's warbler, which was native to the old growth swamps of central Florida and the southeastern United States. With the last confirmed sighting being in 1967, the Bachman's warbler was officially declared extinct in 2023. A mix of habitat loss and tropical cyclones on its wintering habitat in Cuba led this species to its demise. This specimen was collected in 1886, as you can see by the toe tag here. This is a male bird, and it was collected at the Tall Timbers Research Station in northern Florida, just north of Tallahassee, where it was subsequently stored at Florida State University. It was transferred to University of Florida, which is where I took this photo in the lab that I work in now. It was really surreal to see something that is absolutely irreplaceable. If this is gone, we're not getting any new ones anytime soon. So really, really old bird, and one that ultimately did not end up surviving through the modern day. And it's really quite tragic to know that this bird could have been doing very, very well a long time ago if we had just played, the habitat management a little better, but it is no time for ruminating. And on the right here, coming back to St. Lucia, you have the very little known Semper's warbler, which was endemic to St. Lucia and the Caribbean. This is a $1 stamp created and sponsored by BirdLife International in the Caribbean Endemic Birds Festival. This is a very, very rare stamp. Unfortunately, I do not have one. This is not my photo. But it's not declared officially extinct yet because nobody can be completely sure that it's totally gone. The deep jungles of St. Lucia don't have the best birder or ornithologist coverage, so it's an area that's needing more study. However, the last confirmed sighting was in 1961. When I visited St. Lucia this past winter, some of the guides there through the forestry department came up with an idea to host a 10-day-long Semper's Warbler tour to take American ornithologists and birders out into the deepest parts of the jungle where it had been historically recorded to see if there were any chances of finding this very elusive and potentially extinct bird. Very much in a similar vein to the modern day ivory-billed woodpecker craze, if any of you guys are familiar with that. So you must be thinking by now, how can I see these warblers? Well, lucky for you, Florida has at least a few warblers at all times of year. So the best thing to do would be to look up. You have these incredible resources that I love by this guide in particular, for example, the Warbler guide by Tom Stevenson and Scott Whittle. It goes so much further in depth than I was able to today, and it is incredible for beginning birders and ornithologists alike. It's available on the App Store as a pocket phone guide, which has saved me more times than I care to admit. And they also have these awesome 3D models which you can play with. This is the accurate foraging behavior of the red start, by the way. The physical book is quite bulky, so it's not like quite as practical as an actual field guide per se, but you can still have it on your phone, which is excellent. And also you have these resources like Merlin Bird ID, which are awesome and will help you to get the hang of these very tricky fall and spring warblers. And yeah, but the best way to understand is through experience overall. One of the things that I neglected to mention was that, you can find warblers all around Central Florida. The best habitat to look in would just be what is hosting the most insects. Places that I can think of off the top of my head in the Central Florida area would be like Fort DeSoto Park in Tampa, Mead Botanical Gardens, which Orange Audubon does have walks to here and there in the spring and the fall. You've also got the Lake Apopka North Shore and the Wildlife Drive, which has tons of warblers and migrating birds during the springtime. And just these little tiny parks, especially metropolitan parks in the city that just have tiny little green spaces, are great migrant traps, we call them, because it is the first available habitat that exhausted birds will use when they touch down. So they can't land in the middle of a city block, but they can land in a green space in a city block. So if you want to go and find that little bird while it's still touching down there and replenishing its energy, that's the best thing to do, is to go to a little city park like that, like Mead Botanical Gardens or Lube Botanical Gardens in Central Florida, or really just any of these little metropolitan parks in and around Central Florida and along the coastline. So with that, I will thank you for joining me tonight, and we'll move on to whatever questions you guys have, or if you want to share a short story real quick about a really cool warbler encounter you have, or just like share your sentiment on what a really cool warbler you think is, or favorite bird or warbler, I'd be willing to hear you out. So thank you guys so much for having me, and I'll